Rock and roll, baby.
All right, okay, cool.
We are in business.
You want to do the intro?
Yeah, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we are continuing our learning journey covering John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. This is episode 6, Aristotle, Kant, and Evolution. And so, quick story. This is the third time we've started the stream over today, and it's now 8:30. It was supposed to start at 8. So for all those listening in the future, you got to miss all of that.
Yeah.
So anybody that is actually tuning back in now, thank you so much for actually joining us today. It's a little bit of a learning process getting this whole thing running, but every single episode we get better. So I'm happy with that, and I'm happy for all of you that have been joining us and listening and joining in on this learning journey.
Yes, much appreciated.
Yeah. So last episode, it was Plato in the cave.
Yeah. Which the cave was
Grab my notebook.
was Plato's, love tale to his great teacher, Socrates,
Mm-hmm.
and Plato's conundrum that drove him to, well, I won't say drove him to awaken, but which was his great awakening point, was having, somebody he loved and respected so much killed by the state that he loved and respected so much.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a position to be in too. On a superficial note, it would be like you got a friends group and two people of your friends group were beefing. You love them both, but now maximize that
To the entire city and state that you live in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Socrates' conundrum.
Yeah, Socrates had this incredible realization that he was trying to share with the people, and he ended up getting himself killed for it. He was making up strange gods. He was actually giving moral virtues to the gods, which hadn't been done in this way before.
It showed that the sophists really didn't want to listen to the oracles, because the oracle of Delphi was like, when asked, is Socrates the wisest man? It was a firm yes, not like
yes, he is.
some mystical whatever, but like a firm yes.
Then they told him this, and he was like, well, I mean, I'm not. I just know what I don't
know. But
if
the gods
basically
say I am, but I feel like I'm not. That's Socrates' conundrum, that his pivotal awakening point, if you will. And then Plato's pivotal awakening point was seeing his beloved teacher destroyed by his beloved state.
Yes, and all Socrates was doing was encouraging self-inquiry and realizing that we are actually the cause of so much that's happening, but there are ways that we can become more virtuous, and the gods can exemplify this for us. And that was a very dangerous notion at the time. So he got himself
Don't you go
killed.
changing those gods.
Yeah.
People get angry.
Yeah, what did he say when they had him on the stand and they told him, you just stop, and he was like, a life,
what is it? A life unexamined is not life worth living. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, an unexamined life is not worth living.
Yeah. Well, that's true though. It's like how numb and just unfulfilled do you feel when you don't question anything about your life? For some of our viewers, maybe you've worked in a
because the way Socrates thought, it's now a normal way of thinking for us all. Yeah, we think about how am I progressing in my life.
Well, and then when we don't, we suffer.
We feel bad. We suffer.
We suffer for it. That's where the dead-end job and all the, the just 9 to 5 thing that's a lot of us are battling with.
Sucking the soul out of us,
Well, there's no meaning in it, really. You're not. And a lot of times you're told not to question. Which, we're curious. We're curious apes. We question things.
We really are, man. We really are. So we explored Plato's allegory of the cave. We learned about movies like The Matrix that retell this story, and it's still super attractive and meaningful for us. And I'm just on here making sure I share this thing up.
Got to make sure everything's going.
Yeah.
So the start of this whole reason why we were late was actually because we had everything going, and when we went to play the video, no sound.
The video was muted.
So we thought we crashed the system. Turns
out
that
we had an audio issue.
Yeah, it turns out YouTube mute. That's the thing.
That was it. Yeah, it's just the mute button.
So one mute button costs 30 minutes. It's okay. Learning
These things
every
happen.
time.
These things do happen. We are on a learning journey, aren't we? Always awakening. It never ends. There's no cap to human enlightenment. And that's actually a beautiful thing. I like that.
Yeah, it would be
be
terrifying if there was a finite end to enlightenment and to anything. That's one thing that like kind of freaks me out, is thinking of a universe that has an end to it.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no end to how much we can improve ourselves.
Yeah.
How much we can improve
what happens
our
when you
world.
get to the end?
Really? Well, that's it. That's as far as you can go. And then, well, that's the way we get caught into thinking sometimes, is we think that we're just static beings. Like, this is just the way I am. Say I'm only into rock music. I'm not into country or something like that. Well, why not? Maybe you haven't heard the right song yet. And so in that way, we're actually quite amorphous. Our characters can be developed over time, and we can change. I've gone from a very, very shy person from a young age to somebody now that gets up on stage and actually sings in front of people, which is one of the most...
You even twirl and get down on one knee. It's impressive.
Oh, man, yeah. We were rocking. We just had a great show up at Zen West this past Friday, and yeah, it was a joy. It was an amazing experience. Some other incredible bands were there. We had Analog, we had Heel, and then we had the Alice in Chains tribute band.
What was their name?
Sea of Sorrow.
Sea of Sorrow. And they like sounded just like Alice in Chains.
They were amazing. They were really good.
It was funny to watch.
Yeah,
too,
look them up.
Their singer, like if you spotted him walking down the street, you wouldn't expect that voice coming out of him.
No.
Yeah, he just
looks
like a normal dude, and then he's just like...
I was in shock. Yeah.
It's like, damn, man.
Yeah, and they're all really cool
impressive.
people too. All the bands, everybody was really cool, and the venue is amazing. And shout out to Poe, owner of Zen West. You're doing something really special there, brother. I actually got to see the secret tequila bar, and then the other secret downstairs, like chill area that you can only enter through a telephone booth. That is a really cool bar. I didn't even know the tequila bar existed, or the downstairs area, for that matter. It's like I felt like Alice in Wonderland walking through there. Yeah. Yeah, they lost me at the end of the night because I was off running around with Poe and he's showing me around.
I figure you're rubbing shoulders.
I was literally underground.
Yeah. Sorry, underground. Yeah, no, you're gonna get me.
Yeah, but yeah. So I think that's a good bit of rehash of the last episode, and we can just jump right back into it now. So this is episode 6 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis: Aristotle, Kant, and Evolution.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we discussed the important and foundational work of Plato. The grammar of Western civilization is basically made up of the Bible and Plato. We'll keep coming back to both of those repeatedly in certain ways. And we talked about Plato's notion of wisdom and how it involved this process of aligning the psyche so as to reduce inner conflict and reduce self-deception by bullshitting ourselves, and how that enabled us to also achieve one of our meta desires, the desire for inner peace, but how we could also align that reduction in self-deception with getting more in contact with what's real, and that as we practice tracking real patterns in the world, we could then reflectively internalize that back on ourselves. And there was an intimate connection between how we knew the world and knew ourselves. And as we increased our ability to pick up on real patterns, we could increase our self-knowledge, reduce our self-deception, increase our contact with reality, and that would flow in the process of anagoge. And that would bring about the satisfaction of our second meta desire, which is to be in contact with realness. And so Plato has this idea of wisdom as this anagogic process, and we talked about that in connection with his great parable, the parable of the cave. I then pointed out that he had, just as Socrates was lucky to have a great disciple in Plato, Plato was lucky to have a great disciple in Aristotle. And Aristotle is pivotal for us because he lays the foundation for further aspects of a scientific approach to wisdom and meaning. and also for an important formulation of one of the ways in which we deeply connect the self to reality that we're going to talk about when we talk about worldview attunement. So as I mentioned, Aristotle was a student of Plato. He studies with Plato for about 20 years. And then at some point he breaks away from Plato, famously claiming that while I love Plato, I love the truth more. Aristotle remained, and many people would argue this, Gerson, for example, and others, that Aristotle remains in some very important senses a Platonist. But there was an aspect of Plato's work that Aristotle thought was lacking. Plato did not really adequately account for change. So Aristotle was deeply influenced by Plato's account of what made for something real for us, but he thought that Plato could not really explain change very well, and he was going to invent some very important concepts that are going to become integral to our understanding of what it is to be meaningfully connected to reality. Now, Aristotle is very influenced by his father, who is a physician. He's much more of a biologist than a mathematician, so while Plato is much more prone to using mathematical analogies, Aristotle is much more used to using biological analogies. And the word that Aristotle uses for change is actually better translated as growth or development. Aristotle was really interested in how living things grow, how they develop. And that should prick up your ears right away, because part of, I take it, what we often mean when we say we have a meaningful life is that we are growing or developing. In fact, people will often use the word growth as a way of indicating an improvement in the meaning of their life and, in some sense, the developing of wisdom. So Aristotle picks up on Plato's notion of the eidos. So if you remember last time we talked about this, we talked about that a bird is much more than the set of its features. It's not just a beak, it's not just some feathers. It's this gestalt. It's that structural, functional organization such that all the parts function together as a whole. And so what you have is something that acts as a bird. And that pattern, that logos, that eidos, is very hard actually to put into words, but it's very much what does two things for us. It's what makes a bird, and it's also the pattern by which we come to know what a bird is. When we can grasp the structural functional organization, that eidos, then we understand what a bird is. Now, Aristotle was very impressed by that, but he wanted to give it a more dynamical approach. He wanted to talk about it in terms of development. And so he was very interested, as I said, in how things grow. And he noted the role that form had in growth and development. So what he did was he first started by an analogy. So he would use the analogy of artifacts, human-made things, and then use that to try and understand biological things. So, for example, I can have a block of wood, right, and I can make it into a chair, or perhaps a table, or if it's big enough amount of wood, I can make it into a ship or a boat. And Aristotle asked, what makes the wood behave like a chair as opposed to a table or to a ship? And this is where we get the notion of actuality from. We often use the word actuality, in fact, as a way of talking about realness. It's an actual something, as a way of saying it's a real something, as opposed to a fraud or a simulation. So, what makes a chair act like a chair? Why does the wood act like a chair here, act like a table here, and act like a ship here? And so Aristotle said, well, first of all, this is important change, and it's a good analogy for development. When I'm making a chair, that's somehow analogous for how an organism is growing. So what is it that makes the wood act like a chair here and act like a table here? And his argument was, well, it's the form. Again, where this means eidos, not shape, although you can use shape as an analogy. This is the structural functional organization. The wood is structurally functionally organized in such a way that it will act like a chair Whereas here, it will act like a table, and here it will act like a ship. Now, Aristotle's point is that it's not that this doesn't play any role, but he invents this really important idea. He invents the idea that the wood is potential. These terms, actual and potential, actually come from Aristotle. We use them every day. We think they're just part of our natural grammar, but they're actually an invention of Aristotle, and we're going to see how important they are. So the idea is wood is potentially a chair, wood is potentially a table, wood is potentially a ship. Now, when that potential has a particular form given to it, then it starts acting like a chair, it starts acting like a table, and acting like a ship. And this is where we get the notion of information from. You put a form into something, and you will actualize its potential. Namely, you will give it a structural functional organization so it will start to act in a particular manner. Now, that's really important. And then what Aristotle argued is, well, what you see in living things is that they are basically doing this for themselves. So if you use, I just mean this as an analogy, a living thing is like a chair that is making itself. A chair, imagine that a chair could somehow start to impose a structural functional organization on wood so that it started to turn itself into a chair. That's what a living thing does. I mean, food is potential you. You put food into you, you inform it, there's a code in your DNA that ultimately puts a particular form in it that gives it a structural functional organization that becomes you. Now, of course, this unfolds across time. It doesn't happen like that, and that's why we see it as change and development. Now, this is really important, as we'll see, because it's going to be foundational to understanding a lot about how you connect to the world. So, how are we going to make use of this in talking about the way human beings are connected to reality, the way they develop and grow as cognitive agents? So what I want to do first is to step aside from Aristotle and the axial age and move into current cognitive science and talk about an important way of thinking about development and change, especially the work of Alicia Uraro that was directly and explicitly inspired by this Aristotelian framework. So when we talk about how things change, right, we often have a model that we inherited from the scientific revolution, a model we get from Newton. And this is a model that change occurs because of causal impact. So the standard thing, here's this marker, right? I press it. Why did it move? It moved because I pushed it. It seems so obvious and non-controversial, right? So we give an explanation, what causes it to be, because it was pushed. And the idea of all change and development is there's an event A, and it somehow, right, causes event B, causes event C. Event A precedes B, makes B happen, and then B precedes C, and B makes C happen. So as Newton was engaging in the scientific revolution, this notion of how things happen was becoming prominent in him and for the people that was going to take up the Newtonian worldview. Now, what was very interesting about that, right, is that this seemed to solve a lot of problems. And this was brought out by a famous philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who Alicia Uraro talks about. Kant was interested in why was this Newtonian model becoming so successful. The Aristotelian model had been around for thousands of years. Why was Newton's model overtaking it so rapidly? And what Kant said is, well, this does something very wonderful for us, because what it does is gives us a very simple account of how we explain things. I explain C by showing you how it was preceded by an event B that caused it, and how B was preceded by an event A that caused it. very nice, linear, clean, and it seems to, isn't that what's happening? It's so obvious, right? And again, remember, again and again, I've tried to show you things that seem so obvious, so natural, are actually historical creations. You have to pay attention to how we got where we are. Now, why does this matter? Well, because this prevents a kind of vacuous explanation that can occur. This prevents what are called circular explanations. This line, right, prevents circular explanations. Okay, so a circular explanation is when you assume the very thing you're trying to explain in your explanation. So here's a standard kind of model. People often use this without realizing, you know, there's a triangle out here in the world. The light comes into my eye. It goes through nerve pulses. That goes into my consciousness, right? It's somehow projected onto an inner screen. And then there's a triangle there. And then there's a little man inside. And he goes, triangle. Right? And we have updated versions of this, like the central executive and such. Right? This is called a homuncular theory. Homunculus means a little man. Now, when you present it like that, I hope you can all see why this is obviously useless. Because what you should then ask is, well, how does the little man see the little triangle inside? And then what you go is, well, inside the little man's head, there's an even smaller screen with a littler man going triangle. But how does he see? Triangle, triangle. You see what this is. It's an infinite regress. Because you're actually using vision to try and explain vision. Now, please remember this notion of a homuncular fallacy, because that's what this is, because while it's easy to explain, I need you to understand that we fall into it very often when we try and understand and explain ourselves. Okay. That is a circular explanation, because you're using the very thing you're trying to explain in order to explain it. Kant said, this Newtonian scheme is wonderful because if you stick to its grammar, if you stick to its rules, the cause has to be an independent event that precedes, right? Then you don't fall into circular explanations. That's amazing. Now, you've got some problems here. What started it all, right? And, you know, maybe God, and then Kant says no, and he's got all his arguments, and I'm not going to get into that right now. Suffice it to say that this became a predominant way of trying to explain how things work. But then Kant encountered a very significant problem. And it's not a coincidence that it has to do with the kinds of things we were talking about with Aristotle, the kinds of things that can grow, living things. Because Kant went out and he saw a tree, right? And this was very problematic for him, because trees don't follow this model readily. Because he was looking at it, he was saying, okay, well, what's making the tree? Well, it's the sunlight. Well, how does the sunlight get in? Through the leaves. So, right, what's making the leaves? Well, the tree. So the tree makes the leaves, and the leaves make the tree, so the tree is making the tree. And he coined the term self-organizing. The tree is self-organizing. Now, the problem with that is, right, living things make use of feedback cycles. In a feedback cycle, the output from the system feeds back into the system. The tree makes the leaves, that gathers energy, that goes into the processes that makes the leaves. Living things are self-organizing. They use feedback cycles. But when I try and give an explanation of a feedback cycle, I fall into a circular explanation. I fall into a circular explanation. And so Kant came to a rather startling conclusion. He came to the conclusion that there could not be a science of living things, that biology was impossible. Now, Kant is is a towering intellect. He's a genius, a philosophical genius. And so you can't just sort of dismiss that. Well, there obviously is biology. What an idiot Kant is. No. You're the one who needs to step back and think, where's the mistake in the argument? Because if there is biology, and it's true that there is, and I agree that there is, right? And that living things use feedback cycles, which they necessarily do, They're self-organizing, which they necessarily are. And when I try and trace out the causation, I get into circular explanation, which seems like a necessary thing. And circular explanations are vacuous and empty. Then where is Kant going wrong? And this is what Alicia Uraro takes up. And she said, actually, for a very long time, we had no way of solving this problem. And so there was a huge gap between our biology and our physics. Now again, why are we caring about this? Because we need to, if we're going to understand Aristotle, if we're going to deeply understand what we mean when we talk about that we are living things that grow and develop, and that growth and development is integral to our meaning and our sense of who and what we are, our personal identity, that if we cannot give an answer to this problem, we cannot understand fundamentally who and what we are and what the hell we are talking about when we talk about how important growth and development are to us. Because that language will forever be separate from any kind of scientific understanding. So, where's this going wrong? This seems just like living things are feedback cycles, self-organizing. They grow, they develop, they make themselves, right? So what has to go? Well, this. Now, before you jump and say, but that's just what causation is. Think about the fact that we actually know that Newton's ultimately wrong, right? Newton doesn't work with relativity. Newton doesn't work at the quantum level. So we know that we shouldn't be absolutely committed to this view. Now, Uraro actually makes use of an important idea from Aristotle to solve this problem.
All right, we're back.
Hey.
Okay, that's a lot. He actually just summed up the meaning crisis again for us.
Yeah, let's so after the summation, because he did a better job than we'll probably do, but brought it back to Aristotle and, you know, the example of wood and its three potentials in this case.
Yeah,
you know,
chair, table, ship, for instance.
And he was asking, you know, what is it that makes the wood, the chair, the table, the ship? And that's where we're introduced to the potential.
Yes, potential, the idea of structural, functional organization that the potential comes from. How does this thing act? What is its action? What is its actuality? How it's organized. And that structural, functional organization, that's a tongue twister, comes from the ideas of logos and eidos. So this is crazy because then we get the idea of potential and actuality from Aristotle, something that we all understand now to this day, and that is actually instrumental to science.
And so to like define like potential and actual with each other as the potential as it could possibly be. Like wood could possibly be the chair, be the ship, be the table, be a little doll, be whatever it is, and then actual is the action.
Yeah, but what is its actual action? What shape and what is the function, and how is it act? How is this wood acting?
Because here's the thing: you could take that piece of wood and
as it's pieced together.
You could lay it down flat and put something on it, and now it's a table. But then if you take that off and sit on it, now it's a chair. It's not big things, you know, but it's like what's the action that's in,
and this is how we see the world. This is how we understand things. Yeah.
And that potential. Well, you know, so
we were able to describe it with Newton when we got into cause and effect, and we understand how A leads to B leads to C.
Yeah. So and he did the pushing the pen across the table example. He comes up, he pushes it, it goes somewhere.
That's the information of what happens when that thing happens, the information.
But
it rolls now that I push it. That's its potential.
It has its limit.
Yes, because then Kant walks outside and he's like, he sees a tree and he's like, well, how does A to B to C
doesn't work because
define this?
The tree leaves and the leaf trees and and so you get this natural recursive cycle that isn't.
And we're trying to avoid circular definitions because we're trying to understand how things actually work, so we can build and create and think clearly.
Oh, and real quick to the homunculus fallacy, to explain that like easily enough, is like if you, in the definition of something, you assume that its existence already exists within the definition. So like, I don't know, to describe a ball. You know, a ball is a round object that looks like a ball. That's the most basic way. I'm not going to use some examples that I'd like to use because get canceled. But when we use it a lot, those what's another good example?
Well, it's basically we're
if she floats, she's a witch.
And
she thinks she wasn't a witch.
Good
that's
stuff.
That's an inverse of that example, but like, well, the idea is that she's always a witch, regardless of it. That's a really bad example, but the homunculus fallacy we use a lot. It's
but that's a circular definition.
It's discrete in its method or in its existence as well.
And we fool ourselves with this all the time. We're like, well, it does that because it is that.
Yeah,
and that actually doesn't explain it.
Yeah. Well,
it doesn't explain what is a triangle.
Well, why is it soft? Because it's made out of fibers that are soft. Well, that doesn't give me an
why
answer
are the
to
why
are the fibers soft.
Because they're soft.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Newton and Kant are trying. Newton helps us get to the point of understanding how things actually actuate themselves. A to B to C, cause and effect. Kant basically finds this conundrum, and how do you explain this recursive nature of biology, of living things, how they're self-organizing and have these feedback cycles.
If you're Kant, you say there can't be a science of biology. Like, screw this. It doesn't make any sense. Well,
there can't be.
No, it's the chicken or the egg. That's what that is. Like, the biology of like, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And Newtonian physics.
And that's why he was like, and that goes back to God, or
no God. Or, well, I won't say.
Well, how can we still understand biology? Because we can't study things. We can develop instruments to do so, and so we had to be able to find a way to account for biology. Biology took a long time to catch up with physics. Basically, what Vervaeke is telling us here, and it's important for us to understand this, because to understand what we need as living things, what we need for our growth, being integral to how we find meaning in life. If we cannot understand who and what we are, how can we know how to develop ourselves?
No, yeah.
And that's a big question.
Yeah. And what was that term that he used? Not self-assembling and not self-making, but
structural functional organization, or self-organizing?
Self-organizing. Okay. That's the thing, is the tree is self-organizing. Life is self-organizing.
And that question remains, that great mystery as to why.
You eat, and you have encoded information. That's information that tells you how to make things.
Yeah. So even if we can't understand the why entirely, Vervaeke is going to help us get really close to how we relate with the existence around us, why the reframing that in altered states of consciousness that shamans employed was so helpful in allowing us to better orient to life and living in this world.
Yeah.
It's going to get deep. It gets really...
It already is deep, man.
It's so deep already, but just wait. He's just setting it up so he can take us there.
So where were we at in the notes? So
I think that was pretty much it. Yeah,
that's pretty much it. Okay, man, we're getting concise.
That catches us up pretty well. And I think we can jump back in. Is there anything else you were thinking?
No, I got those weird little things of like tricks of word that hit me in the head, but I gotta ferment them for a week or so before I bring them back out and think about them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I like to revisit these episodes or just think on certain aspects of them too. There's a lot of contemplation involved because he opens these doors that are like deep hallways. Well, they go a long way.
The weird thing is like I don't okay. Aristotle, Kant, as far as I know, they didn't speak English. So it's funny that like information and like English words as they were translated, they were translated in such a way that Latin, still retained the meaning behind it, but in the way that say English would do it. And I would be curious, and I'm not a linguist person. Good luck teaching me a language, but I'd be interesting to see in other languages, particularly ones that aren't either Germanic or Romance languages, how they handle, like how they make words for these concepts.
I think it's based off the same underlying structure. There's just different ways of going about utilizing the language.
But those are the weird, curious things that go off in my head. So I'm just like, oh man.
Yeah, it's really trippy.
And so I am notorious.
Action, actuate. It still has the root act within it. Yeah.
And I'm notorious for like butchering the English language to suit my means, and like my theater geek friends hated me for this because like I'd use words like this, and I love what Vervaeke's doing because it kind of validates me. I'm like, yes, actually, you can pull apart words like this. To understand, understanding,
you can.
to stand
really
under.
Can.
Okay, insight. Yep. Oh, you have sight within it.
Yes.
Like,
there's a reason.
Okay, it's not just me.
Yeah, that's always fascinated me, linguistics and etymology.
Oh, man, yeah. But onward we go.
Onward. All right, back into it, guys.
Yeah, let's bring it back just a few.
All right, I'm gonna do that.
A few smack rolls.
Now, Uraro actually makes use of an important idea from Aristotle to solve this problem. So, she's going to use Aristotle in order to explain a new and powerful way of talking about growth and development and self-organizing processes, which is known as dynamical systems theory. So, Uraro, first of all, makes a distinction between causes and constraints. So to get at that distinction, let's go back to what seems so obvious. Okay, here's the marker. I push it. Why did it move? And immediately, the Newtonian grammar just comes into place. It moved because you pushed it. And then you might step outside of physics and say, well, I wanted to push it, but that's not what I'm asking. Because it could also just be that some other object bumped into this and it moved. Why else did it move? Okay, so think about what has to also be true in order for this to move. There has to be empty space, relatively empty space in front of the marker. This has to have a particular shape to it. This has to have a particular shape to it. Right? Those aren't events. Right? Those are conditions. Causes are events that make things happen. Constraints, right, aren't events, they're conditions. They don't make things happen, they make things possible. And there's a big difference between a condition and an event. The Newtonian way of thinking has us so fixated on this, so foregrounded on this, that we're not seeing this anymore. But see, Aristotle, because of his Platonic view, actually considers this more important. Why? Because when I talk about a structural, functional organization, when I talk about a pattern, I'm talking about this. This is where you will find form. This is where it's sometimes called the formal cause. This is where you will find the structural, functional organization. Right? Conditions are structurally, functionally organized such that motion for this is possible. Now, this is important because this is, of course, actuality, and this is where we get potentiality. When I shape possibility, that's what I mean when I say something is potential. I mean that possibility has been shaped by constraints so that these events are more possible than these events. Okay, so we're going to do more, but let's stop here and let's see how this is already starting to solve the problem of talking about the tree and its self-organization. So in a tree, you've got a bunch of events happening, biochemical events. What they're doing is they're actually causing a particular, right, form or formula or structural functional organization. Now think about it. Why do trees grow the way they do? Why do they grow like this? Why do they spread out their branches? Why do their leaves spread out? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to change the possibility of a photon hitting a chlorophyll molecule. The structure of the tree shapes the possibility of the events. So the events, right, cause this structure, and then, right, they cause it, but this then constrains the events. So look at me, I'm a living thing. I've got a bunch of events happening in me, and that creates a structural functional organization. That organization creates an internal environment in which the probability of events is dramatically altered. So events that have very low probability happening out there have a high probability of happening in here. And events that have a very high probability of happening out there have a very low probability of happening in here. And that's what it is to be a living thing. The events, right, cause a structure, a structural functional organization, an IDOS, a form, and then that constrains the events. Now this is not a circular explanation because I'm talking about two very different kinds of things. I'm talking about actuality and potentiality. Now, it's important to realize that the discussion of possibility, many of you were saying, oh, this is like, oh, it's so abstract, and what does this? This is actually integral to science. Okay? Science depends on there being real potential. The potentiality is a real thing. Right? So, you know, here's the object moving around. Right? It's on the ground. Look at all this kinetic energy. Look at it moving. Look at, oh, it stopped. Did I destroy all that energy? Where did the kinetic energy go? You can't destroy energy. Well, the kinetic energy has become potential energy. If the principle of the conservation of mass and energy is real, then potentiality is real. Look at this. Look at something from Newton. Force equals mass times acceleration. Is that an event? Is it, oh, that's happening over there right now? Or does it happen every Tuesday at 4 o'clock? This isn't an event. This is, right, how things are shaped. It puts a limit on what's possible in the world. Talking about real potentiality is not talking fictional or abstract. It's a way of talking that's integral to our current science. Okay. We're still not done, though, because Uraro points out that there are two kinds of constraints, so our explanations can become even more refined. There are constraints that make a form of event, a type of event, more possible. She calls those enabling constraints. Right? And then there are constraints that reduce the possibilities, reduce the options for a system. These are the selecting or selective constraints. Now this is going to give us a very powerful way of understanding development. Let's use it the way Uraro does to talk about one of the most significant theories of development and change, one of the great hallmarks of science. In fact, it's a foundational theory for the science of biology, which of course is the theory of natural selection, the theory of Darwinian evolution. Because the theory of Darwinian evolution is probably the first dynamical systems theory in science, and it is a theory that is designed precisely to account for growth and development. Obviously not within an individual, but across speciation. Okay, so let's take a look at the theory.
Oh boy, that was fun.
All right, yeah, so that's a lot, really fast.
Yeah.
Might be helpful to go over a little bit of that. Man, I just took up like so many pages of
Yeah,
notes.
and look at his whiteboard, man. That's.
I'm glad he's using black marker today.
Oh, man, yeah, that like green and red marker stuff was
Yeah,
killing me.
jeez, man. Come on. This is what happens when you've been teaching for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we learned about how... Okay, dynamical systems theory, causes and constraints, empty space is part of how things are shaped. That's trippy. So we have conditions and prerequisites, potentials, and the constraints that make things possible. Now, cause and effect theory is causes are events, but in biological systems, you have constituents which create conditions that create possibilities, and the more possible something is, the more potential it is. Possible is like the form of something, the structural, functional organization of it. And so we understand how trees, for instance, the structure of the tree shapes the potential or the possible events to create the potential outcomes, so it's able to shape itself as it does, face itself towards the sunlight to gather the energy that it needs for photosynthesis. So in living environments, you have this high probability where the events are causing the structure that constrains the events. This is what actually makes us living organisms. We have our own particular sets of events and constraints going on inside of us that are way different than what's going on outside. And what's going on outside is way different than what's going on inside of us. And somehow there's that distinction that biology allows us to develop.
Yeah, and so what would you call it, the Apple guy, the Newtonian end of things is like action, reaction,
the
action.
Apple guy, yeah.
The Apple guy. Not Jobs. Not Jobs.
No, not that Apple guy.
But
not an apple cider guy either, and not Johnny Appleseed.
Yeah, there's a lot of Apple guys.
Old Johnny or Isaac Newton.
So that's only one side of things, though. That's the actual side, if you will, like the side of action. But the other side of that is the side of conditions, like it being bright in this room is not an action. Now, of course, there's actions.
When you turn the light on and off,
being bright, but that is a condition.
It's a condition, yeah. It's a
prerequisite.
prerequisite.
Within that condition, there's also a condition. I have an eyeball that has a bunch of micro conditions in it, so I can see.
We have been shaped by these conditions. That's why we're about to get into evolution here.
Yeah, and the constraint of those conditions is that logos that defines
how we've defined the structural functional organization.
Like my ass on a piece of wood makes it chair. The condition of my ass being on that piece of wood is chair. But if I put a bowl on it,
it's now a table.
It is now table. So the conditions have changed, even though the actual wood itself, and everything kind of sandwiches on top of itself and layers up and layers up.
You have actuality versus potentiality.
Well, this really opens us up into our way of thinking. No longer do we think of, ball hitting another ball, other ball going somewhere else. It's what would happen if, and like the core of scientific experimentation is creating conditions under constraints.
Yes.
And as tight of constraints as you possibly have so you can replicate.
You were saying we're measuring potentials and percentages, for instance.
Yeah, that's... Yeah.
So, how fast is that ball going, and what are these different conditions that are created?
And if that, then this. Which, if you like Sudoku, that's all Sudoku is. And if you're a programmer, that's all programming is. Like, it's that concept... I don't know, that gives us, insight into the future as well in a deeper way than... I guess we were before the axial I guess this would be axial revolution still at this point. And so what is the potential that, we're going to get rain for this? And if you don't go look out, then you don't know what the conditions are. So you wouldn't necessarily have accurate potentialities. But yeah, it's a cool, this two-sided coin thing that's going on between the actual and the potential. And like you said, you know, you lifted the pen up, you know, like, oh, you know, bring it up off the ground, you know, there's all this, how do you describe it? But basically, you know, there's this kinetic energy that's going up and going up and going up, and gravity pulling down. Well, now it stopped. What happened to that? Well, nothing happened to it. It just turned into potential energy.
Potential, yeah.
If you create the condition of opening your hand under the condition of gravity, the pencil falls to the ground and then stops at the ground, which is the condition that everything that makes up the ground is holding together enough that the pencil doesn't go through it.
Right.
And I'm not getting quantum physical. It could be a piece of paper and the pencil shreds right through it. I don't know. Or it could be quantum physical, if you will. But yeah, and what was the woman's name that he mentioned who brought up the two different kinds of constraints? And this is what we're going to go into. He'll end up saying it again, but
yeah, they brought the book up earlier.
Where we stopped was you have basically constraints and destructive constraints.
Enabling constraints and selective restraints. Yeah. So potential.
Yeah. Those that limit the potentials of things and those that increase the potentials of
enable
things.
So
that's what we're going to get into next after this short little break.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have a short segment for you after that. Actually, no. Yeah, a short segment after that, and then I don't know from the end because he throws a lot of at us towards the end.
But we'll see where he's going with this really soon.
Yeah,
and it's not going to be, I don't think, completely explicated in this episode, but over the next few, and it's going to continue to really start to shine, and we're going to understand. Okay, this is how we develop meaning as a species, and this is how we can develop a richer meaning than we've ever been able to experience, because we are now this global interconnected species. And if we start to engage together with the sense-making capacity that we have, the collective wisdom that we have together, then we are really going to be able to ratchet up our potential.
Well, sure. We're at a very enhanced distributed cognitive network at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And if any of y'all are feeling like a little confused and lost, or like
that's okay.
Not everything's sticking, I don't think that
normal.
This isn't designed to put this all in your head. It's meant to help reveal as it goes on, because as these episodes go on, I find myself
revisits these notions,
and I also find myself thinking back to previous episodes.
Yeah, and it's okay to rewatch concepts. I rewatch these episodes. I'll put them in like 1.5 speed or so, and
go do some of the reading, or like listen to the audiobooks or other stuff, or
the
listen
books
to
you
other
recommend
people
are
talk
excellent,
about this.
and I haven't gotten through, but maybe one or two of them.
Even excerpts and stuff like that are most pertinent to this, and you'll see other people talking about Plato
in the
Aristotle,
Discord. I need to actually get up on that Discord
and get on that Discord.
And I signed up for the channel, but I need to actually get in there and get active and start talking with people, because we're out here, we're doing this thing. I'm sure somebody else out there has thought of doing something like this, so we'll probably want to invite them on for an episode.
Well, soon we'll have the studio more set up. The studio,
and we can bring you guys in via Zoom. However, I can make a little screen for you all, and you can join in that way as well. Yeah.
So we're going to take a quick break. Hey.
All right, we're back.
We are back.
What's up, everybody?
Yeah, man.
So, we just discussed all of that. We got down to how the actual nature of something is dependent on conditions that create possibilities, that create supercharged possibilities like potentials.
Well,
and then enabling constraints and selective constraints are going to bring us into evolution now.
And the actualization of something happening does not happen without the potential.
Mm-hmm.
And the realm of the potential is what are the conditions, what are the constraints, and what are those?
It's like space is full of potential. Space informs the formation of things as well, which is this stuff is really it's very trippy. It's interesting these are really fun thought experiments to go into, to understand and to see a tree without the label tree on it, and just to see this outgrowth of earth consequent of sun and the nutrients that it brings in through its roots from the planet below. And it's a really unique encounter at that point with this alien organism, if you can really forget the label of the idea tree that we are typically have in our heads, because every tree is so unique. And then you can look and see how this thing is branching, how it's grown itself to be able to collect the sunlight. And what is this thing? What is a planet? What is a universe? All these questions.
Wait, what is a planet? Did somebody plant it?
Yeah, right. Well, I really like how plants are planted and animals are animate.
Yeah.
Walking along atop the ground.
And I guess funguses are fun.
Funguses are fun. Yes.
Don't go eating stuff out of your lawn unless you know.
Yeah, only with a trained mycologist should you ever go picking.
Yeah, or somebody who's
a wild connoisseur.
Yeah, or somebody who's
been generations
eating them since there was a kid, and they know exactly what that is.
They know what they're looking for. That's right.
Yeah. Oh,
that's how we did it for ages.
Yeah,
you know.
What's the saying? There are old mushroom hunters and bold mushroom hunters, but no old bold mushroom hunters.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
that's clever. All right, so we're gonna jump back in here now, guys.
So what you're looking for, first of all, is there has to be a feedback cycle for, right, any dynamical system theory, because we're talking about a process that's self-organizing. So what's the feedback cycle that evolution talks about? Of course, well, it's sexual reproduction. Where do goats come from? Other goats. Goats are produced, there's the product, and then it feeds back into the system and becomes the producer. Makes more goats, that make more goats, that makes more goats. That's why we call it reproduction. It's a feedback cycle. So what did Darwin realize? Well, he realized that there were selective constraints operating on that. There were conditions in the environment that reduced the options for organism. That's right. So what's those conditions? Scarcity of resources. Okay? So I've been looking at some of the theories of early life, and there's an argument by several biologists that there's no evolution for about probably 800,000 years or so, because there's no scarcity of resources when life first evolves. So life is static because there's no scarcity of resources. Scarcity of resources means there's competition. Scarcity of resources means not everything can live. And so that reduces the options for the system. Okay, so selection, reducing options. But that's not all that's going on, right? If that was the case, everything would just die, evolution would end. And, and that can happen, extinction events. But there's something else. There's enabling constraints that open up the system, open up the options. So look around. Look at me, look at other people. There's variation. There's considerable variation. Variation increases the options. So look what's going on here. You've got this feedback cycle. As it's cycling through, you've got the selective conditions reducing the options that are available, and then the variation opening them up. And you can think of it almost like an accordion model. The variation opens it up, and then as it cycles, the selective constraint pushes it down. And then from there, it opens up again, and then it gets pushed back down. And then it opens up again, it gets pushed back down. And as it cycles like this, it's constantly changing in a way to be better fitted to the environment. That's evolution, right? It's a kind of circular. Evolve is related to words like revolve. It's this revolution with change. Now notice, what I'm trying to get you to see is, like, first of all, this is important. I mean, I wish I was Charles Darwin. This is one of the great, great theories. He gets to sail around the world. I mean, what a life. He gets to sail around the world, go to some amazing places, and then he comes back and makes a world-changing theory. It's amazing. But notice how much this Darwinian theory that is at the foundation of biology, how much it is beholden to Aristotle, how much it depends on Aristotelian ideas. Okay. Now, Uraro talks about this as a virtual governor. So a governor is any device that sort of limits what you can do on a system. Like if you have a governor on a steam engine, right, it sets the range, it limits the range at which it can cycle. She calls it a virtual governor because it's not an actual machine, it's the shaping of possibility. She stops there. And work that I've done with Leo Ferraro and Anderson Todd and Richard Wu, we think she should continue to finish the metaphor. This is a virtual generator because it's a set of conditions that are generating options for a self-organizing system. And here's the idea. When you put a virtual governor systematically together with a virtual generator, such that you're systematically regulating a feedback cycle, this whole thing is a virtual engine. Because when you attach a governor to a generator, you get a virtual engine. So this is what a dynamical system theory is. A dynamical system theory is basically a theory that lays out the virtual engine. It shows you how there's a feedback cycle and why that's not just random and chaotic, why it produces growth and development, precisely because there's a systematic relationship between a set of enabling and selective constraints. Now, all of this is very, very Aristotelian. So let's now take it back to Aristotle. Because Aristotle was interested, now he doesn't use the dynamical systems language, that's our language. But this language was directly inspired by, powered by Aristotle. So using it backwards to try and connect Aristotle to our current understanding, I do not think is anachronistic. So Aristotle is interested in our development. He's going to add something that was missing from the Socratic notion of wisdom. Remember, the Socratic notion was trying to overcome self-deception. And then Plato adds a whole structural theory of the psyche to explain how we overcome self-deception, how we become wise and achieve wisdom. But what's missing in the account of wisdom and meaning, according to Aristotle, if I can use this language, is what's missing is an account of growth and development. How does wisdom develop? How does meaning develop? Well, this is where we get something that we talk about and we use as in our language, but we don't, I think, get the depth of what Aristotle's talking about. There's an aspect of who and what you are that's fundamentally connected to your projects of meaning and your project of wisdom. You often might have used this term or related terms, but do you really know what you're talking about? And this is the notion of your character. Now, first of all, your character isn't your personality, because if we're going to use these terms strictly, you're born with your personality. Personality is part of just your general constitution. It's what's given to you by the biology and the environment that you have no choice over, right? But your character is that aspect of you that you can cultivate. Now, you can either cultivate it unconsciously, surreptitiously, indirectly, or you can cultivate it more explicitly. But what is your character? When we say that somebody's acting out of character, we're usually making, and this is important, we're usually making either an existential or moral criticism of them. When we say Peter is acting out of character, we often will mean something like he's normally honest. He's normally honest. He normally has the virtue of honest. Notice the connection here, by the way. Virtue. And we've been talking about a virtual engine. That is not happenstance. When you're talking about a virtue, you're not talking about an event. You're talking about, again, a set of conditions that have been cultivated systematically in somebody. Now that points to something, that when we're talking about character, I'm going to suggest that what we're talking about is what is the virtual engine on a person's development. What system of constraints have you?
What kind of virtual engine are you developing? Virtue, virtuosity. This is so intriguing, and this is where it gets a little tricky. But he does revisit these things in different ways, so we will certainly gain a full understanding through the series. Okay. Science depends on real potential. We recognize that the potentials can be enabled, or there can be enabling constraints. There can be selective constraints, which are disabling.
And we have
potentials.
We have
the idea of conditions.
We have the idea now of a governor and a
virtual
regulator,
governor and a virtual generator.
And a generator.
Yeah.
And
so reproduction, this feedback cycle.
Yeah.
The conditions that reduce options, such as scarcity, competition, allow us to conform and adapt. And so you have this many potentials and then constrained potentials, many potentials.
The thing that's like, you could think of it, not just the according thing, but to use a different analogy for that is, say, to go Darwinistic with it, you have, a species of birds that develop beaks that can get through seeds. Well, then you have something that crunches them down, and maybe there's only small seeds that are available. So then there's a development that grows out of being able to eat
now
the
it's
small
constrained.
seeds.
It's got to be able to shape its beak differently.
And then it reshapes itself and goes on out like that. Darwin's finches are a good example, because finches have a relatively short lifespan. So you can observe multiple generations. Maybe not in a short period of time, but you can see multiple different, what do they call them, evolutionary branches within the same place, because the time span's short enough.
Wow.
But yeah, the in and out, the thing that pushes everything in and constrains everything, and then from those constraint reorders itself and opens up back out. And like
the virtual governors is taking the variance and increasing options. So we're revolving through this feedback cycle that's gaining all of this information to allow us to form ourselves and adapt better to the environment over and over and over again. So it's a process of revolution, of adaptation to change in the environment through the species reproduction cycle.
Well, we're
continually reproduces itself.
Evolving revolution.
Yes. Yes.
To revolve, to re-evolve, to do the cycle again and again and again. And so that, like I mentioned while this was playing, but for those of you at home, when he mentioned it was Socrates who really questioned what is this self-deception, and then it was Plato to create a structure on how to, say, get out of the
self-deception. Yes.
And
wisdom.
Now
what is wisdom?
And now we have a component through time.
Yes, Aristotle's like, how does one develop wisdom over time? How do we grow?
Yeah.
Yes. So he's further explicating this idea from Socrates on.
Yeah.
And this idea of potentiality that Aristotle comes up with is where we get the word potential, and actuality is from Aristotle. That catches up now to Darwin. Darwin is very much beholden to Aristotle here. And we're seeing how small of a world it is, kind of, as we go through these. You see how these individuals truly, we are all interconnected with this world, and you really get the sense for how interconnected we really are.
And and I'd never really thought of it, but it does make sense that evolutionary Birdman guy.
You're talking Isaac Newton.
No, not Newton. That's the Apple guy.
Oh, no, Apple guy. I'm sorry.
Yeah. My brain does this. It just drops names and words. Darwin. Well,
what did you call him?
Bird guy.
Bird guy. Oh, yeah, Darwin. I should have gotten with bird guy.
Finch guy. Well, so his whole theory is based on constraints and potentials and like quite literally to the finches, the constraints was the food changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and
so the ones with the big beaks weren't surviving, and the ones with smaller beaks were surviving, and so the organism is now changing over time through reproduction
and reiterations.
Yes, and Uaro is the author. She teaches us how we have this virtual governor and the virtual generators acting in this feedback cycle to develop a virtual engine. And that's how we caught up to how does wisdom and meaning develop with Aristotle. That's how we catch that up with this idea of having a character. And so rather than like the personality that one is born with, so we do have certain biological predispositions that make up our personalities, but we have also the personage, the cast image, the mask that we wear as individuals that is our character. And this is not a good or bad thing. This is just what is.
Yeah.
And so this is something that can be cultivated consciously or unconsciously. I got to make sure I look at the camera too. I'm looking at you here.
Yeah, I'm so pretty.
You're too damn pretty. So acting out of character, you can recognize when someone's acting out of character, there's like some kind of moral existential dilemma going on with that person when we think that way. So we recognize that virtuosity or that sense of virtue or virtuousness when it's failing in each other.
It's interesting that, like, this word virtue came up, and I had this thought while I was re-listening to it earlier today, but when he mentions that, virtues are a set of conditions, right? Well, I don't know how many people...
And it's how well are you acting with that set of conditions. Well, it's how virtuous.
The Book of Virtues, I don't know if any of you grew up
how wisely are you choosing?
But the Book of Virtues was like a kid's storybook with like lions and sheep. Very Christian. But the Book of Virtues was quite
very
literally
Western and Platonic then too, right?
Yeah, stories of conditions that create results that, like ultimately they want you to live under, like be courageous and kind and all these other things. But to be courageous, there must be certain conditions. To be kind, there are certain conditions. So your virtue is dependent on conditions. And then when we say, like so-and-so isn't necessarily themselves, they're a little out of character, their virtue, they're not holding up to their virtue. Well, we also define virtues in other people. That's the existential end. Like he said, usually it's existential judging. Like, well, usually you're kind and honest and nice, and now you're not.
There's something in the way that this person's existence is acting that is different. Yeah.
And,
and that can be good or bad. How someone's character changes.
Well, getting back to like, maybe it was like the first episode when you just briefly talked about horror, but like maybe the reason why we have such a visceral impact on our people, other people, when they step outside of that normal assumption of their virtue, why we have such a bad reaction to it is like, well, what horror is not being able to have a grasp on reality. Well, when you say when you're a kid and the first time your parent really snaps and like loses their shit on you, like, well, they're not holding up within the conditions that are predefined for how I understand what's going on here. And like, no wonder like our faith gets broken so hard when, so, hey, maybe there's a lesson in here. Don't put too much of your own virtues on other people, which actually one of the axioms I hold in life is hold yourself to a higher standard or higher conditions than others, and you'll never have an issue. But when we hold each other to a higher standard and too high of a standard, maybe when it shatters, it's like, well, then what do we do? Because
it's hard not to do that. But I have heard that put as well. When somebody is being cruel or nasty to you, it's just keep in mind that that's their own issue. That's their permission to feel however, or their right. we can give them full permission to be however they want to be in that moment, as long as they're not
do
harming
it anyway.
Somebody.
So, but the other thing is when you have people whose initial like
our business is what's going on within us. It's not our business what's going on within other people, unless we're trying to care in a considerate way.
Unless we've made the agreement with that person.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other end of this, though, is I've had some, they're good friends now, but people that's at least the virtue that I put on them. They're mean, crotchety, angry, whatever, and they step outside of that, and you're like, wow. Oh, like I've had the big tough guys crying on my shoulder, like at 3:00 in the morning after a night of drinking and stuff, So it's on both ends.
Don't prejudge. Yeah.
Yeah, because on one end you could judge somebody too high.
No, we really got to meet each other as we are in this moment, because it's really easy to develop, not just like we develop labels of the idea of a tree. And if you peel that label off of a tree and just try and see it without any preformed idea or conception of what a tree is, and just see it as this thing without the word tree or the idea tree on it, something fascinating. We can do that with one another. And it's very easy for us to develop images of one another. And then it ends up in conversations with somebody where literally just two images interacting, rather than who we truly are in this moment. And I love that notion that J. Krishnamurti shares. What if we lived life without an ounce of comparison? And what if we saw each other as we are in this moment, rather than through images and ideas?
Well, I guess that's the goal, right? But to be honest, though, I think it is necessary for us to do this, because we do it with everything, and that's how we understand.
It's useful for navigation.
Sure.
If there's someone that's proven to be dangerous, of course, that's good information to hold in the back of your head, but you don't have to believe anything 100%. You can still encounter every moment with full love and openness.
Well, and also for the wise person is being able to, on the other end of it, hold the perception of
it's many considerations
as well. So.
Yeah, and you put them on scales, basically, like this potential is this high, but nothing is certain. And that's it's a scary thought to think that we don't have to be certain about anything, but we can have things on scales of potential, like this is likely, but it doesn't have to be for sure. We should always leave ourselves open to new information.
Yeah. Well, and so all these things are tools, like literally psychotechnologies, techniques for using tools. All these things are tools, but we shouldn't get so, I don't want to say shouldn't, but
you must be wary, perhaps,
of
or
only
caution.
Using certain tool steps all the way. Because, look, if we just wanted to do the Apple guys and the Newtonian end of things, we'd have no conception of potential and conditions. But if we were all just potential and conditions, there'd be a wishy-washy and no straight line of cause and action and reaction as well. These are tool sets that we're developing to use together.
Yes. That's why love is such a helpful orientation, because it allows us to be unconditional. And it allows it so you have a wide open potentials in front of you, and then it allows you to consider, to be very considerate. So you're considering the many wide things very deeply, and you're open in your orientation enough to be able to continually take in new information, and you're not attached to what it's ultimately going to mean psychologically. You're allowing yourself to be free of attachment to expectation and all of that. So this is allows us to be very objective, yet also very, this is a loving orientation, and this is the wisest form of love, you could say. That's this unconditionality that people like Jesus and Buddha were trying to teach.
Yeah, and it wasn't that, these great individuals didn't see this, didn't see the free rider for what they were, and didn't see the wise man for what they were. It wasn't.
They're just very widely considered, so they could understand.
Yeah. As opposed to being, consumed by either or. It's being able to see both.
Because we're attached to an ideal. This person should be this way. They should be doing this. They should be doing that. So we get ourselves all riled up inside, and it's someone else's problem.
But really, we just got to be worrying about our own problems. So, what's that? The whole, you point.
If you still the water here, it helps still the water everywhere else.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
And contrary to the popular belief, you can't just complain about it and things will get better. Complaining is one action that doesn't really do anything.
Or just find this group that's doing things wrong. And
well, yeah, because like, okay, well, the initial point is complaining about it. It's like, oh man, like my back really hurts. I need to get some new shoes. Okay, well, the next time you complain about, did you get new shoes? Did you change the conditions that made your back hurt?
Yeah,
you know, like what's going on? Okay, well, you got new shoes. Does your back still hurt? Have you been stretching? You know, it's like, but you know, and not to rant, but I'm going to rant a little bit. But nowadays, like the people who are making the change, at least in the surface level that everybody's seeing right now, are the complainers. They complain and complain and complain this, that, or the other, whether it's colonization, racism, separation, this, that, or the other. It's just complaint. But where have you really heard a good, like, okay, well, for this complaint, here's a series of conditions we can, do to change this changing over time.
We've heard ideas,
and evolve. And then we have to test the ideas and not just complain when, say, maybe my idea didn't work out so
like,
well.
If you didn't like the idea of racism, segregation probably isn't a good idea to try as.
But we got to try it again just to make sure.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. You see a lot of crazy stuff happen. But segregation. Oh my God.
Instead of just complaining, complaining doesn't change the conditions. It doesn't create any restraints, and it doesn't. It doesn't create any.
No, this is why Martin was trying to teach us. Martin Luther King was trying to teach us this orientation of love, and he said, like, not this force that all the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. We must love one another.
Yeah.
This idea that we must love one another means you're not having like an emotion towards people. You are being unconditional. You're being wide open, fully considerate of every single potential, because you're looking for what is best and true and good for one and all. From this orientation of this thing that we call love. And this thing that we call love should remain beyond full description, because it is there at the bottom of all the great wisdom traditions. East, west, north, south, it always comes back down to this thing that is synonymous with what we use the word love to point to. So this orientation to life that allows one to be wide open, putting yourself in other people's shoes, seeing multi-perspectively. That's what it allows us. And so that's a wisdom that we can cultivate, that can guide us, and this can help us develop our virtuosity, being more self-loving and truly caring for ourselves. We're going to take care of that back, And all the things will fall into place as they need to from this orientation. So this is a very much root part of the solution that I continually return to, because it's something that is depthless. There's no end to the wisdom of this thing that we call love.
And yeah, I was thinking about this the other day too, that love as not an emotive force, like an emotion, but
because it encompasses so many. You can be
jealous,
angry, and bliss, and so many things.
So
over this thing that we call love.
Well, one of these days we'll have to go through all the things that love isn't in an attempt to.
Love is a union, very much. You're uniting yourself with all these potential variants to try and understand them and embody all of the understanding that you can, get all the information so you can form yourself best.
It's interesting that at least humans. I can't speak for animals because I'm not a non-human animal, but love is tied up with our reproduction.
It is
how we reproduce and how we grow and how we teach our young as well. So there's
how well we're going to raise them is dependent on how loving a relationship we have with our spouse and with them, and how loving they're going to end up being able to be, and that means how comfortable in life and how virtuous. How much can they engage in highly virtuous acts?
Yeah, it's just
you got to find love somewhere.
I'm not sure yet where maybe never, but where the strings are that tie everything back to that, because
because it's not something you expect either. It's something you just give. So that's why it's like, again, it's an orientation. It's an inbuilt capacity.
Well, you give and you receive, and the moment
you can feel it come towards you, but you don't need it.
The moment you expect it, no matter how true of love it is, you'll never really appreciate it for what it is.
Yes, true that. Yeah, that's a great note.
Don't expect a Christmas card. Just be happy that you got one.
No, that's a great reminder, though. That's really helpful.
All right. Well, we're slightly off topic. Let's bring it back so when we come back in, we know where we're at.
Yeah, let's get our virtual engines back here.
Ah, yes, the virtual engine. Well, yeah, it's a mechanism to keep itself, like we have two countering things that keep this engine from exploding.
The governor and the generator.
Yeah, the generator keeps everything going, but the governor keeps it from exploding into chaotic nothingness, or just chaotic bits, or potential that is not really good for what we're trying to do.
The opening up to options, the constraining. How cool. Okay.
Yeah, so we're back. Okay, yeah. Virtual engine and not Yeah.
Identified with, and what system of constraints have you internalized that regulate your development? Let's ask a Socratic question. Let's do something that Socrates would do. We spend a lot of time on our appearance. We spend a lot of time on our status. How much time did you spend today on your character? How much? If it is the virtual engine that is regulating your growth and development, you should be, of course, spending a lot of time on your character. But are you? Now, Aristotle proposed ways of trying to cultivate your character. I would argue that his method, his famous method of the golden mean, is a way of trying to get you to set up conditions to cultivate your character. So, for example, what is courage? We would all like to be more courageous, I take it. Well, Aristotle proposed that it's the golden mean, not the average, that's a misunderstanding, right? Because it's golden mean, between two things. Of course, you can be a coward. You can somehow be defective by having a deficiency, but you can also be foolhardy. Right? Just running into traffic doesn't make you courageous. What you're always trying to do is you're trying to set up a system where you're paying attention where you lack the enabling constraints, where you don't have enough generation, and also conditions where you lack the selective constraints. When you're too broadly, you have too many options that you're identifying as courage. What you have to do is you have to train yourself. You have to cultivate your character by engaging in practices that will slowly, over time, create a virtual engine. Because you are a self-organizing process. You are the source of your actions that modify the environment that then feeds back into you and changes you. And then you produce your actions, and then the environment feeds back and changes you. Here's the question I ask you. Are you just letting that run? Or are you trying to rationally and reflectively cultivate your character, structure a virtual engine so that that self-organizing process is growing and developing in an optimal fashion? Aristotle takes the question, and we use this, we even use, and I'm not saying we use it trivially, but we don't get the depth of what we're saying. One of the most trenchant criticisms we can make of ourselves, of other people, is this. Listen to my language. Listen to it. He's not living up to his potential. Part of what makes your life meaningful is that you have cultivated character that allows you to actualize your potential. You've created a virtual engine that regulates your development in a way in which you grow up. It's a constantly in which self-organization has been regulated and shaped into self-improvement so that your potential is fully realized. So Aristotle brings in this notion then of development and growth as part of what it means to have a meaningful life. He brings in a new aspect to the notion of wisdom. Wisdom is gaining the ability to cultivate virtues, to create your virtual engine, a set of virtues that basically is regulating your growth and development so that you actualize your potential. Again, think about it. What are you doing to cultivate your character? Because Aristotle points out there's a deep form of foolishness that comes from a lack of character. He calls it akrasia, which we poorly translate as weakness of the will because we're all post-Protestants and we think the will is our central thing, even though increasingly there's scientific evidence that the notion of will or willpower is a defunct idea. We should give it up. Right? So what's akrasia? Akrasia is when you know what the right thing to do is. You know what the right thing to do is. And we talked about this, remember, with the chocolate cake, but you don't do the right thing. And here's where we can sort of put Aristotle and Plato together. Plato gives us this sort of story about how we have to structure the psyche. But Aristotle gives us a much more penetrating analysis of what that structural functional organization is. Here's what Aristotle would say, why you're behaving foolishly. Ignorance is when you do the wrong thing because you don't know. Part of what foolishness is when you know what the right thing is and you still do the wrong thing. Here's Aristotle's answer. You do the wrong thing because although you have the right beliefs, and notice again the impotence of belief here, you don't have sufficient character. You have not trained things. You've not trained skills. You've not trained sensitivities. You have not created a virtual engine that is regulating your development and growth such that you will live up to your potential. You will actualize yourself and do the right thing. So, we're starting to see, again, the deep grammar of what we talk about when we talk about meaning. And we notice now that there's this developmental aspect to it. What is it to live up to your potential? I mean, that's a phrase we use. What is it you're saying when you say that about somebody? Why does it matter so much? So Aristotle would say, let's go back to the analogy. Please always remember that it's an analogy. Let's go back to the analogy of a man-made thing. Okay? How is it when we know when something has been well made? What makes something a good knife? Right? Well, when it has a structural, functional organization, right, that allows it to fulfill its purpose. So knives are for cutting. If I've taken the potential in the metal and organized it the right way, structured it the right way, it will actually function to cut very well. Right? And notice that this is a word that's also deeply associated with our sense of what it is to have meaning. So Aristotle asks, well, what can we do with this analogy? Human beings aren't made the way knives are made. We're self-making. And here's an important idea. We're self-making. We're not just self-organizing. The term that's Francisco Varela and Evan Thompson have generated to talk about this is we are autopoietic, we are self-making things. So you're different from a tornado. A tornado is self-organizing, but a tornado will move, its behavior can be rapidly self-destructive. It will move into conditions that destroy it. You're self-organized in such a way that you have a structural functional organization that allows you to seek out conditions. So the tornado does not seek out the conditions that will protect and promote its own self-organization. It's not self-making. You are self-making. So here's the interesting thing, and this is a brilliant idea that Eric Pearl brings out in his book, Thinking Being, right? In living things, right, the purpose of the thing is its structural functional organization. It's a self-making thing. So what your purpose, your function is to enhance your structural functional organization. It's like, oh, well, this is a problem, you'll say, with philosophy. This is also abstract. What does that mean specifically? Well, for Aristotle, it means paying attention to the fact that you are a rational, reflective creature. You're unlike a plant. A plant has this, but all it basically does is actualize its ability to sort of digest. So let's take a look at this. We have inorganic matter, right? And then it gets it's informed, and that makes like a living thing. And that living things can get a more complex structure that make them self-moving. That's what an animal is. An animal isn't a mammal. An animal is a self-moving thing. And then some of those self-moving things have structural functional organizations, here, for example, that take that self-moving and really actualize it. Remember we talked about that the word psyche, where we get our word psychology, mind, originally meant your capacity for self-moving. And we came to apply it to the mind because the mind is that part of you that is the most self-moving, the most self-making. You're a mental thing, a psychological thing. But is that enough? No, we're getting from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, you can optimize that. You can take charge of that. You, unlike other organisms, you can do the actual revolution on yourself. You're capable of cultivating your own character rationally and deliberately. You can become, right, a rational thing. To live up to your potential is to make sure you have cultivated a character that takes you as high up this hierarchy as you can go. That's how you live up to your potential. Somebody who lived only as a plant would be a debauched, failed, degraded human being. Somebody that lived only as an animal, unreflectively, impulsively, would be a debauched, failed human being. But the argument continues. You say, of course, of course. But all the way up here. You must cultivate your character so that you, as much as possible, actualize your potential for being a rational, moral human being. That's the hallmark for Aristotle. You become a good person if you actualize, if you inform your being with a virtual engine that realizes those things that are distinctive of our humanity. What makes us different from the plants, the animals, the other creatures that just have minds? What makes us different? We understand that we have always And we still do understand ourselves in contrast to the other things we find around ourselves. Why am I more valuable than this table? Why do I matter more? Because there are things that can be found in rational beings, things that we find intrinsically valuable and important that cannot be found in merely mental things, and all the way down. What are those characteristics that are unique to us? Well, here's where Aristotle gives the axial revolution answer. Your capacity for overcoming self-deception, your capacity for cultivating your character, for realizing wisdom, and for enhancing the structure of your psyche and your contact with reality. That's what rational means. This sounds, if I hadn't said all of this, what I'm going to say now would sound trite. Your purpose is to become as fully human as possible. How are you cultivating your character to do so? This is what Aristotle is going to ask you again and again. How much of your life is dedicated to creating a virtual engine that realizes your rational capacities, those things that make you most human in contrast to all the other things around you? So, Aristotle has developed this very impressive theory of wisdom and character, growth and development. One of the things we could use today is to go back and make use of this so we can reanimate, rejuvenate these terms that have become tired and superficial. We have no alternative terms for describing our lives, for the meaning in our life. We talk about purpose and living up to our potential and growth and development, and which blah, 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 because we don't have any depth to these terms. One of the things we can use Aristotle to do is to go back and deepen what those terms mean for us, rejuvenate what they mean for us. But I want to continue on and to talk about this development that's occurring in the axial revolution. And I want to talk about how Aristotle helped further the historical process by which he contributed to our cultural grammar of what it is when we're talking about meaning, purpose, wisdom, self-transcendence. And so what I want to look at next time when we're together is I want to look at Aristotle's account of a worldview and what a worldview is and why it matters so deeply to our self-understanding and our existential meaning. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Worldview. Next round. Wow, man. Yeah. He really brings it together. I had to make a note of 51 minutes where he lays out what makes us different, how we can define our purpose as human beings, how we can bring out what is distinctive of our humanity and cultivate that. Thanks. And it keeps laying out more every time I watch these. It's just they're bottomless.
And real quick before we get it too far into it, when he laid out on the left side of the board there, the inorganic matter, and then the plant, and then the animate animal, and then the self-thinking animal, and then the next state above that.
I have that marked as well. That was 49
minutes. That's the story of Genesis in the Bible. So,
The universe.
First, God created, the earth, the heavens and the earth, and then all the plants, and then the fishes in the seas, and then the animals, and then the thing that names the animals, and that's the Adam and Eve. And then what happens? What's the next stage? They eat the fruit of knowledge, the being able to understand self-deception.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that for me, it kind of puts where we are right now in perspective, because
big time.
We're post fruit of knowledge, if you will. So we're that next evolutionary step.
Yes.
Within, what makes us humans, to be as human as we possibly can be. Got a little bit of a tear there going on, from...
It's really beautifully put, and it's backed up so well.
And it's a huge responsibility, but it's not necessarily...
It's also what's going to give us that deep sense of belonging and meaning that we've been missing in life. It's to fully engage.
Yep.
So now the existential crisis is, of course, still within us, because we got a little bit off track. We got disconnected from the depth of these insights that we had previously gained and built upon for so long.
Like Nietzsche said, we killed God. We're at the point now where we're the next stage of evolution that has to rejuvenate, to make young again this idea of, and not necessarily the religious God, but
forever we must continue to cultivate this capacity that we have, that Christ and Buddha were trying to show us, this capacity for self-transcendence.
Fulfilling our promise, which is...
fulfill our promise.
Because the promise isn't just like I promise that this is going to happen. There's also the promise of somebody that has promise, which is fulfilling the potential of their character.
Yes.
And the character, and he spoke on, what is wisdom, and he really brought it together.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, wisdom is the ability to not just live up to your character, but figure out what your character is. What is what conditions do I need to then become more human? And
how can we self-transcend our animal self, these lower natures?
Yeah.
How can we live up to our promise and develop the meaningfulness in our life that we seek to inhabit and share with others? So here we are. I brought it up. I brought the chart up on the screen so we could see.
Yes, let me get a quick look. I'm going to get real close to the camera here because that's where the screen is, but I'm blind.
Hold it up for you a little bit. So the inorganic can be informed. Living things can be informed. It grows into self-moving things like animals. And then the mental things,
which is the first hermetic
like
principle,
Adam and Eve,
is the universe is of the mind.
Mm-hmm. The psyche,
the grand mover's mind,
prime mover. Yeah, the action of consciousness is what gives us our rational thinking, our ability to delineate and reduce things and parse things out to understand them. We also have this capacity for rejuvenation, for this rebirth, for this constant reproduction of our character.
Yeah, and it's almost as if we're using every state below, the highest state on that chart.
Commercialism has certainly learned to appeal to.
Well, even in trying to find
the
wisdom, we're using the
or
inert
the
material parts of the universe, and you could say that would be like, Plato was the mathematician. As well as who gave us the triangle formula?
Pythagoras. Yes.
So you could think of that understanding as like the mineral part, and then there's the planted end of things, and then there's the animate understanding of now there's action in what we do.
Now we understand cause and effect.
Yeah, and then there's the next step. It's like, we have a mind, now we can critique. And it's not a direct linear path through the teachers, but
you can see how the ideas are growing though through them.
And
they're further expanding upon each other's ideas.
Yeah, and it's the past and the past and the future folding into itself. And he brought this up in earlier episode, or I think it was like episode 2 or something. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But how literacy of language allowed our past brains to connect with future. So past self with future self.
Yeah, we could store information and bring it back up.
So you'll see this tied in, not just cyclical, like, one into the other, but like one into the other. But if you remove time from the frame, there's also components of the latter in the previous, and then somehow in the future it affects what's in the past as well. So it's I may be permanently flawed because I've been messing around with this thinking about time, but I don't necessarily think it's as linear as we think. Yes, of course, the way we experience it is linear, but there seems to be this like future concepts infecting the past.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Like our ideals are things that we can cast out into the future. We can create visions that we can drive ourselves towards. And that ideal ends up becoming the future if we are virtuous in our development towards that goal.
But, after listening to this again, I'm
the whole thing can fold in on itself. And yeah, there does seem to be a timelessness. Now we are able to track time, and we can see the passage of one object from here starting going all the way over here. But it is actually just one long moment experientially for us. And we know that as soon as you go out deep out into space, time is very different. And if you change your speed, time is very different.
Well, and here's another thing too. So like, even though, well, I won't name any specific one because I'm having trouble with names, but even though like each teacher from each little period of time, of course they have their rightness, and that's what we're talking about, where they're right. But there was also spots where they were wrong, and we could look back and see they're wrong, but we can actually gain further insight in this future now than what was in the past. So that's like the future affecting the past in some weird, funky little way. Does that make sense?
That is funky. Yeah.
Because, like, say, like,
well, it's
the natural philosophers, Thales, that's his name. So Thales, like, everything is the moist. That idea was like, well, of course he's wrong. Not everything has water in it or whatever, but the idea that there is something that's in everything that is everything.
The effort to try and break it down and see what the
and it was only till
underlying substances. Yeah,
we're now in the point where we can look back and be like, well, he was wrong in the sense of there's not moisture in everything, but we can find the really, really more right than he probably would have realized how right he was.
Idea that he was
that's the future
with,
affecting the past as well, and not in some like looper sci-fi.
But it's building
stuff,
on. But it's building on for sure,
and modifying the past as well. And I think he mentioned, and I'm not going to try to like quote it or cite it too heavily, but in earlier episodes, he mentioned this future affecting past, and maybe it's only from our perception of the past, but still, like we're a linked cognitive network that's linked to the past as well.
Yeah, no, we have these terms that help us get a handle on what past, present, future are. But the fact that there is this now that we're in, that we're able to develop things that come true in the future that are building on what we developed in what was before in the past does have an interesting circularity to it. I heard this one description of, who was it, Grant Morrison maybe, that described human beings, if you could see them from outside of time, from a higher dimension, we would be like long worms with like a face on the front and our butt in the very back, like all the way back when
Aren't you
born.
Glad we don't exist in that universe?
Like, and you could see yourself just snaking through all of your existence and like all at once. So everywhere you ever went and everything, like on a Google map, if you could just have this one static line from where you begin in your life all the way to the very end. But that's another way of looking at what we are.
Yeah, we kind of do that with philosophy, and all I'm going to say is philosophy is a continued conversation, right? So that's what we do, and we're literally observing the worm that we are through philosophy. It's this continued conversation. You can reference it from any point in time within the worm, like any part of the length of the worm.
Worm doesn't sound appealing at all.
Hey, worms are cool. Do you know worms travel in herds?
Long primate.
That sounds even worse.
Potentially 100-year-long primate.
Oh man. Okay,
so then there's also the notion, I was listening to a podcast, and of course, we've seen this in like Back to the Future too. There was alternate potential timelines, and quantum theorists are playing with the idea of multiverses and multi-potentialities at all times.
Well, it's become so ubiquitous and current culture, where it's like
alternate universes.
Everything is a multiverse, like
right,
MCU multiverse, and this multiverse, and that multiverse, and even like Black Mirror. Everything that happens in Black Mirror is technically in the same universe, but it's a multiverse.
Here's a fun and perhaps uplifting thought, perhaps comforting, and maybe it does help align us to potential solutions for the meta crisis, the meaning crisis being at the root of the meta crisis that humanity now faces. Meta meaning many concurrent existential crises to our species, and potentially life-ending.
All together as well.
Yes. Damn it, I lost my train of thought. This is what happens. Okay, so how did we enter the meta crisis? Okay, multiverse theory, multiple timelines.
Oh, there we go.
So just like Marty experiences the hell version of his hometown in Back to the Future 2, and he's got to get back on the right timeline, perhaps we, through our action, through our virtuous action in the development of our characters and the cultivation of wisdom together, collective sense-making capacities, expanding them together, and larger numbers of us trying to work on these problems together, maybe we can make sure that we are in the timeline that turns out okay, the one where we actually thread the eye of the needle.
Well,
and we can feel when we're shifting into the other potentials. In depression and anxiety. It's like, I'm not doing what I need to do as a human being in this day and age right now.
Well, that's, I guess the portions of ourself that have been built up through, as he's been speaking about, it's personal, but it's also like, I don't want to say cultural, but us opposed to just me. As we're going on, this is what builds you up and builds you up and builds you up. And when you start to fail on that and you start to feel the anxiety about things, maybe that's a natural mechanism to help guide you down the right bifurcated fork.
Yeah, if you're avoiding something you need to be working on in your life, your body knows it. Physiologically, you feel it.
Well,
psychologically, it depresses.
And within this point of the Actual Revolution, we've learned how to think of the world in the universe as potentialities, so we can really truly feel like, I don't like this potential branch I see. And what was that word that he meant when it's like when something's wrong?
Oh yeah,
and you said it. Yeah, it's just kind of like when you have acrasia. So I experience this a lot. I'm kind of a loudmouth when I'm a loudmouth when you meet me in public. If I think something's wrong, I'm going to bring it up, and I've been publicly shamed for it, but I have a very strong sense of acrasia, what's right and what's wrong, and you have to say something about it, like that thing that draws you up to say something about it, like, no, that's wrong. I've had dreams of the murder trucks coming down the road, throwing people in, and yelling at the top of my lungs, "Get out of the way, the murder truck's coming." Jeez. And that's the same feeling I get in real life when you hear something that is wrong. Like, even it's like, well, I've got it pulled up here. I've got the research on it. I've got multiple cited sources and everything. I got to tell you about it.
So when you see someone not living up to their character in some way.
Well, sure, yeah. Well, hey, mom does it best. Like the idea of mom is like,
calling you
out. Oh
yeah.
Hey, you're gonna hate me for this, but I gotta let you know, like, you effing up.
Yes.
And also, if there is such thing as a conscious, that little person inside of you, the adjuster of your thoughts and everything.
Yeah, the conscience.
That thing must be experiencing acrasia all the time. Maybe that's like a personification of acrasia.
I think maybe acrasia might be the psychological reaction to when we're not in congruence with that conscience, because the conscience just tells you. I don't think it has a preference. I think it's just like it's like a deep wisdom that's almost like a compass. It's an inner compass. It just knows when you're on track.
Somehow they're tied together.
It knows when you're in tune with your purpose as a being alive in this miraculous cosmos, perhaps. It feels something like that, doesn't it? Because you have it since you're young.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I will admit a lot of it is dictated on how you're raised and everything.
Well, culturally informed, but the wisdom is something that we've developed biologically as a species.
Well,
it's in our genes. It's in the ways that we think and act.
So many brilliant wisdom people that have come out from infinite cultures that have all come up to to have these ideas and these thoughts and these realizations. So, like, yes, there is a cultural component that informs you.
Sure, because we become a social species. We get along with one another. We sing songs to one another. We make music and art and love and all these things as a social species. So this is very much a part of our actual biological evolution to have this capacity.
Yeah, and it all goes,
to know when you're in congruence with reality, with oneself for best optimized long-term survival, and with your group.
Yeah.
And if you're not interrelated with the group in some way, then you feel loneliness. It's a horrible feeling.
Well, the worst thing you can do for a kid as far as punishment goes is put them in the corner and turn them around so that, so they're ostracized from the group.
Yeah.
That's just powerful stuff. And when we were at the show, I mentioned, out back when we're all hanging out, what is the first trauma you ever experience? And, well, that's the trauma of being put down after you bond with your mom. You're put down.
Perhaps being born as well. It might be.
Yeah. That's the ultimate separation. But I think that's so traumatic that your brain just goes.
But then, after the brain is really starting to become actually consciously aware outside of the body. It's still so used to being held. When it's put down, it's terrifying.
It's interesting.
But you gotta.
It's interesting. Like, and I won't say all animals, but it seems to be a constant within mammals. To have, like, even if it's just,
you got to push them out of the nest eventually.
Yeah, and even if it's just the initial, like, being born and sticking around to the mom until you're done nursing, you can fend for yourself. We still, as mammals, have that strive for connected
with our families, our family groups, and our communities. Yeah.
Because even the most singular mammals, like.
Because
there is a period of time where they are the group. It's the siblings and the mom.
We protect and look out for one another, and we need that.
This is a very powerful instinct that we can now, as the top of this hierarchy that he has on the whiteboard, as, not just thinking, mindful creatures, but creatures that, can aspire for more.
So rational is just not the scientific material rationalism. It's the ability to delineate between various potentials that we have at offer in our experience at any time, and to choose wisely and to develop that wisdom. There's different practices and skills that we can take part in to further develop that wisdom, self-reflection, self-inquiry, contemplation practices, and
science would be the
tool.
The tool, right? Science is the tool that rationality uses. If maybe that won't make sense. I'll have to listen to it again, but I think that's like science is the tool that rationality uses. Because science, like in science, you have, what would happen if this? Okay, well, I'm going to create conditions and everything so I can make either this or not this happen. It has to be able to fail, right? And then I have to do it, and then I have to do it again, and I have to keep observing it, and then I have to change it, keep track of my changes. But the rationality seems to be above the science. It's not.
It's what allows you to employ science rationally.
Yeah. Science is informed by rationality, opposed to the other way around.
Yes. Our ability to cultivate our what is it? Our virtual engine.
Well, yes. So, like, okay,
such that we can wisely use these tools. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is. No wonder we have a bad response to people that don't take care of their characters, because the character is that,
or the fact that we're not taking care of the world very well right now.
See it though. If within your character you have the governor, which keeps you from going too far, too fast, and exploding. But on the other end, you have the generator that gives you. Well, if you don't have
more gas when you need it,
you don't have the generator aspect within your character, well, then that's the sloth component where you just don't do anything, and then the engine sputters out. But then if you don't have the governor in, then you explode.
Yeah.
That's why you don't take a governor out of the little, like, gas powered golf cart you have. Yeah, it'll go faster, but you'll blow the engine up.
Yes.
So it's you have.
We lose a lot of artists at 27 for this reason. They're burning like bright candles.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
But no rest and.
Well, and then
just
also
going all out, and maybe there's nothing wrong with that. That's
think
just
about all
thing
the
that happens,
brilliant scientists that did
happens.
horrific things to other humans.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
They had
Still
plenty
are.
of the generator, but
Yeah,
they didn't have the governor.
We're all still guinea pigs, for cereal and microplastics.
And other things that must not be named.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we want to keep ourselves online here.
Yes. We love you all.
We love you
people
too.
who think we're crazy, we love you too.
Zuck, we love you.
Yes,
so
Zuck,
very much.
We love you. We wish you'd come back. I want to see the light in your eyes.
Come back home, Zuck.
Come back home, man.
Come back home.
The dirt is good. We have plenty of smoke.
I think there's goodness in him.
There's
I think
goodness.
he's just
there's goodness even in
disconnected.
Well, there's goodness in the Soroses and all, like in the Carl Schwabs.
There's very few actual sociopaths. I don't know about Carl Schwab. That
well, dude, even sociopaths have goodness in them. I've got some experience.
Okay. I'll give you that. But psychopathic sociopaths? Perhaps?
Well, there's goodness in them, but then also it's like, what can you do?
But you're making a valid point. Like, regardless of even if we can find goodness, every living being deserves love. Somehow that seems intrinsic. That seems like the right orientation.
Well, and from my
mercy,
from my point of view, is if
Ahava Hesed, mercy, love.
If I can't see the ultimate spark of goodness in God within the devil himself, I have failed.
Right. I remember trying to understand the Iraq War, and I was like trying to understand how can I love if I'm supposed to love everybody? How can I love George Bush and Dick Cheney for this?
But also, the wolf wants to eat.
Then I realized they're afraid and they're gluttonous, and so that means they're hoarding because they feel like they don't have enough, and they need more and more and more and more to feel secure
Well, you can open the opportunity for the wolf to join you around its fire, but you got to realize it's a wolf.
Yeah.
So you can hold these two things, like, this is my conundrum.
How do we appeal to the puppy dog within?
You breed him into a pug.
You make cartoons of them like Little Bush.
But yeah, right. But like
at least we can laugh.
My conundrum is to realize the danger within an individual, but also still have compassion and love for them. And just because I have compassion and love for them doesn't mean that I'm going to invite them into my home. I think that's naive. To do that, but that doesn't mean like if I saw Carl Schwab and his car was broken down, he's got a broken leg and he just got mugged and all of his shit taken and he was by himself and didn't have any connections, I'd probably give him a ride to the hospital. And that's love. Hate is saying screw that guy and then stomping on his head. That's why I don't engage in hate, and I don't use that word much anymore.
Well, how do you spread more love around the world unless you demonstrate
precisely
that intentionality to help decrease someone else's suffering? Because we are all in this together.
Oh yeah, no, we are. We're on a tiny little ball hurling through space at enormous speeds. So we're all in this together.
Yeah, we got this skinny shell of atmosphere.
But that's how to be more human than human, like what he's talking about. The highest aspiration of the last step is how do you live up to the highest moral standards of being human, and in my mind is having love for the light of God that is in the devil, because nothing in my mind is outside of God.
We keep transcending our previous ideas. We keep growing our capacity to love and to cultivate that capacity for meaning and belonging and to share that with others.
And it feels good to share it with others too, man.
It does.
Like, that's the thing I'd love to express to y'all at home, and like my friends that I don't really get to talk a lot about this because most people are, most of my friends are just like, hey man, you're going too deep on me, bro. But it's like, dude, like it's really fun to get into this, and you don't have to be at super high level intellect for this either.
No, this is something we all need each other to figure out.
Well, when we're
together,
all
we need
perfectly built
mind
and body to be able to do this.
Yes.
And, literacy, yes, it's going down in recent years, but it's still not the hardest thing in the world.
No. And, watching something like this with us, you will definitely increase your literacy.
Yeah.
You will definitely grow the brain.
Yeah, well, yeah. And
you will create new connections, new understandings, new capacities.
And it's worth it.
Well, at least be inspired. Yeah.
Well, it's definitely worth it.
Highly. Yeah, and it's this calls back to Krishnamurti again. And I remember he asked a psychotherapist once, when somebody comes to you and says, I'm depressed, what do you do? And he's like, well, I asked them different questions about their life and this and that. And he's like, okay. And then ultimately you tell them what it is about them that they can fix and improve, because And so he basically then goes on and says, do you ever tell them that their depression is the world's, not just their own? And this is a really key insight, I feel like. If we are disconnected with the reality of our day, then we're going to feel a sense of disconnection from life itself in general. And when our species is currently at this point to where there's so much happening in the world that does really call for as much considerate, wise attention that it can get. If enough of us aren't doing that, if you're not seeing enough helpers out there generating actionable hope in the world, then you're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel anxiety in the world. You're going to sense the social breakdown going on around you. And right now, as it magnifies, intensifies, and accelerates, I do feel that we are all feeling that. We just went through a pandemic where they had us all locked up inside, and whatever one feels about that, we still all became more introverted, closed off, disconnected from one another, and it's a thing that could affect us negatively if we did not have this capacity for wisdom. Thank God that we do have this capacity for self-reflection as we go through this.
And what is wisdom? It's the development of character, which is character is the thing, is the conditions that allow you to transcend.
Yes. So are you living up to your potential? Is a very valid question for us as human beings. Yeah, because we are a social species. So now, and this is what makes it hard. It's because we are a social species. Are you fulfilling your promise is connected to how well our society is going to be functioning. And we know this intrinsically, deep down subconsciously. So when we start to see the world become unsettled around us, we know we're feeling unsettled inside. We're not doing anything to improve ourselves. We know that it's only going to get worse out there somehow intrinsically. And when it's happening on a global level, that you start to see social breakdown occur, for me, it's kind of alarm bells going off. This is time for us to really... I was having a conversation at the bar after the show with Jesse and the owner of the bar, Poe. And I was saying, this is a time for us to turn up the art. And they thought I said turn up the heart. And I was like, that's just as good or even better.
Yeah, well, good art has heart, and I think good art is comprised of heart. So therefore, yes, both of them.
Yes. If we want to see a more stable, functional, peaceful, safe, secure, and sane world, then we can be better to one another. We can start to reunite. Even if there are people that we have severe disagreements with, we can figure out what's the compromise. How can we be conciliatory towards one another and create a more stable environment for our fellows, for ourselves, and those that come after us. And in doing that, you find the most deep, resonant sense of belonging you could ever wish for. You become a part of humanity's story. Like, we're here right now, and we are about to go through the eye of a needle, hopefully.
And
you get to take part in that.
We're the part of history that is definitely going to be written.
This is a peak
and video
climax
and
part of our story.
Yeah,
big time.
So right now is probably going to be the most salient lessons that we have to give to the future because of the technologies that we have. As you know, or video recorded right now. It's more than just paper or print being dark on paper. Now it's actual video. Now it's actual audio. Now it's
Actuali podcast.
Actuali podcast.
But it's high definition.
Yeah.
High fidelity streaming, immediate access to any information, and people talking live about the very things that we're facing right now in the world. This is how that we can utilize the technology that we have to rapidly accelerate our solution making potential that we have as a species. And we are miracle workers. We've gotten ourselves out of some crazy corners and hard fixes, and we somehow manage to thrive in these moments. We can actually surf the apocalypse. We can skirt the precipice.
Surfing that nuclear wave, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's the name of a band too, Surf the Apocalypse.
Surf the Apocalypse.
Pretty sure it came from a book before.
All right, well, not shouting out a band, but if they're any good, let us know.
Yeah, right. So,
did we get any?
Where else did we have anything else that we want to cover here?
I don't know, but this episode hit hard. It was a lot of information, and I would advise going back to Vervaeke's channel and watching this for yourself without the commentary, and then come back, of course, and watch us again with the commentary, and maybe leave some commentary of your own. But
yeah, any questions or comments that you have, we can actually answer them in the next video.
Yeah, because I think this episode is a particularly pivotal point that pulls a lot of strings together into the center of this web that he's trying to make. He is Anansi the spider spinning his
he's recapitulating the meaning crisis deeper and deeper and deeper. More detail and definition is being given to it, and how we may awaken from it, because these are two sides of the same coin. That all starts to come into play increasingly as we go through this.
God knows we need this. I know it's cliche to say, but like, we need to wake up. We need to
continually,
and
never consider yourself fully woke. Always be awakening.
Yeah, but like, in all honesty, man,
we cannot be too certain.
I'm a pretty positive person when it comes to like where we're going as humanity, but we're at a point right now where I'm really tempted to be pessimistic. You know,
Well, we've been pessimistic about the future for a long time, and I've been through that personally, and as a species, we go through that in stages as well.
I'm worried.
We're upset with the direction that we're going as a species, and internally we're recognizing
I'm starting to understand what,
we're looking for others to blame for that.
Great and great grandparents felt going into World War I and World War II. This is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like we're at the point right now where we're at a brink, and in World War I and World War II, those were world wars, but I think this is a war within the spirit and the understanding of mankind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the stakes are very, very, very high, and I don't want to be a complainer. So
no, it's all because
thank you for bringing me on board.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. Because it's also the most exciting time. We're seeing all of our ancient wisdom traditions. All these ancient religions now inform each other. The idea of God to us continually is growing up, in our capacity to transcend our previous.
I'm glad you brought that up, because, like, even though I have such anxiety for where we're going, I would not want to be alive at any other point in time, past or future,
right?
Other than this point of time.
Yeah, same.
It's
and that's why I want to share this.
Definitely not boring.
I want to share this with people so that they know you're not alone. If you're starting to feel the destabilization going on, like, who isn't right now? But a lot of us have been really paying attention to stuff and trying to look for answers and solutions, and it's hard to find the helpers. But once you find them, you recognize them. Like, it's a chime going off when you encounter somebody like Vervaeke. And this guy he's not partisan. He's not winning one side or another.
No, he's just very curious.
A loving human being that has developed his wisdom through his studies. And this guy's at the cutting edge of AI research right now, among other disciplines that he's involved in as a cognitive scientist. But his work is actually helping us as a species develop hopefully a more moral wise use of this high level technology. So it's good to know that he's one of the people helping us progress AI, because we need guys exactly like him to help us, because it's inevitable. You don't want some despotic government to develop something that is super powerful first before there is something at least developed by more benevolent intentions to also help rejuvenate potentials in humanity as others might be shut down.
Well, what we create is going to be a reflection of us, and which reflection do we want to give them?
Yes, indeed.
So
true.
We're going to have to go into that age of AI, and potentially seeing ourselves really very much be like what we saw as what created us. When we create an AI, will we be a God that feels good about it, or are we going to be a God that feels lacking?
Really? Yeah. So let's choose the timeline that we want to be on here, and may humanity awaken from the meaning crisis. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Actuali. Once again, I'm Chris. This is DJ. We got another show coming up October 22nd. We're going to be in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. That is going to be a whole day festival. I think we go out around 4 or 5 or something. I have to look again at the flyer.
What's the establishment's name?
That's up at Love Drafts.
Love Drafts, not the one in the city, but
Love Drafts Brewery, the actual bar establishment.
I found out the hard way.
Not the separate. Yeah, you did. Yeah,
I drove into the city for their whatever micro bar in there, and I was feeling really proud of
micro
myself.
bar. That's right. They have a satellite.
Yeah,
this is the main one with the venue and everything, and the brewery attached. It's a really, really cool bar. There's like Nintendo 64s in the walls, and
don't play
Smash
this guy
Bros.
in Smash Bros. It's not.
Well, you just gave up my ability to be a Smash Bros. Shark.
Well, I suck at Smash Bros, but
Yeah, I got a lot of Smash Bros. In against my friends.
Yeah.
When I was probably a teenager when that game came out, the first one.
I played a lot of Sega, Road Rash and Sonic.
That was good stuff, man. Sonic was awesome.
Watch out with the sidekick. It gets you in Road Rash. Just be like,
I
sidekick.
don't think I ever played Road Rash.
Oh,
is that like the Mario Kart, Sonic Mario Kart?
No, Road Rash was a motorcycle game, and it was one of the early ones where it's just you got your motorcycle and
it's like a side scroller?
A front scroller, and the track just turns. But it was starting to get good.
I remember they had the racing in Sonic 2 where you could do the split screen and.
Oh, it wasn't the Sonic one.
Yeah,
no, I played Sonic and Road Rash.
Oh, Road Rash is a different game.
Yeah,
okay.
Road Rash is
Sonic
just a motorcycle game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I vaguely remember.
But it was one of the old school ones where the road would come at you and you turn right and turn left and sidekick your buddy.
It must have been weird to program racing games back then before.
When it was top scroller. It was top scroller, so it wasn't. Yeah, so you'd make the road narrow and then it would just widen as it.
Yeah, it's all animation.
And
really good programming.
Oh man, yeah, give it up for the people who could do that kind of stuff, man.
Seriously, man. Yeah, you need rocket.
Well, now they're at the point where they're making AIs.
Skills to make games now.
They're programming, encoding, informing the
not just rich physics, but actual AI intelligence. Yeah, a lot of that cutting edge is happening in games.
Well, and so we were talking about this outside. What is the grand mover? The grand mover
prime mover.
Prime mover. Excuse me. Is the thing that can create the conditions and restrictions and everything to make all of this. Well, we're getting to the point now where we are the reflection of God, where we can do this in video games. You can create your own physics in video games.
And then you can install you can actually act through the avatar in the video game.
Yeah.
You embody this digital being.
Hey,
just like life somehow embodies us.
Well, the sincerest form of flattery is mimicry.
Awareness.
So
yeah,
I hope God is flattered.
I hope so.
We're really trying to mimic it.
Yeah, it remains a great mystery, and I think the world's great religions help inform us as to what that thing is that is immeasurable, that we'll never fully know, but we can know it through the practice of love, and unconditional love, I believe, will get us there. So I'll continue to speak on that as well throughout these, and as I do on my podcast for previous listeners, because it gives us a handle right here and now. What can I do in this moment? Well, love is going to be at the core of it. If it's self-care, if it's in order to be able to better care for life and others around us. If you're trying to solve a deep conflict, look at it with deep consideration. Be very considerate so you can consider the wide range, put yourself in different perspectives, try to understand all the other perspectives as well as you can without being repulsed and pushing away against them, as we typically do. Have no conditions, be unconditional with this orientation of this thing called love that we have capacity for.
There may be a period in time where you push against it, but just because you did once doesn't mean that you have to always. You can push against things and be like, okay, hold on, but then they come back, and if it's worth it,
and I mean psychologically, incensed, angered, deeply sorrowed by whatever it is. The initial affront is a natural thing that can happen, and then how long you let that activity be charged up and acting inside of you. You don't want to hold anger for too long. You don't want to hold depression for too long. You don't want to hold anxiety for too long. You certainly don't want to get recursive and keep going back through them over and over again once you've learned everything you can from being depressed, perhaps, for instance, after a breakup or something like that.
Well, and then you start to apply all that to the good things in life.
Yes.
You could do that in the good way, which is, the lessons learned, but then also the negative way where we call
it's
it
very easy to get neurotic. Yes.
Yeah.
To be jaded.
To be jaded.
Be neurotic. You're stuck in it. Yeah, revisiting that loop over and over and over again. Once you've learned everything you can from a sadness, give it love.
Yeah.
Just love it. Love it for the experience, for the
and
wisdom gained,
and grow on.
Then you'll cry harder
than you ever did while you were sad.
when you really let go.
Then the love is made.
But then you're free and you're like open and relaxed.
The good cry, like a good rain.
Yeah,
all right.
Because that's trauma. Like you'll revisit something because the body thinks it needs to protect itself from that thing, but that thing isn't always there in the environment. Yeah. And you got to be able to delineate, and you got to be able to let your walls down and be able to feel spacious and alive again.
Rejuvenate, juvenile, young,
reborn, reproduce,
re-younginize,
revitalize,
revitalize.
Yeah, that vital energy of new creation.
Yeah. Well, I've been DJ.
I've been Chris.
We love you.
Love you guys.